At 30,000 feet, the engines went silent, and a passenger jet turned into a falling shadow in the sky. People screamed, oxygen masks dropped, and panic spread faster than the plane itself, because no pilot announcement came, no reassurance, only the sound of fear. While everyone prayed for a miracle, no one noticed the quiet young woman sitting by the window halfway down the cabin. The same girl nobody spoke to, nobody greeted, nobody even remembered boarding the flight. The girl everyone ignored was about to become the only reason anyone would see the ground alive again. Before the story continues, comment where you are watching from, and stay with me, because what happened next changed every life on that plane. Just a few hours earlier, the flight felt like any other ordinary afternoon journey. Sunlight washed over the terminal windows as travelers moved through the gate with coffee cups, rolling bags, and tired expressions. Nobody was thinking about danger. Nobody imagined this flight would become unforgettable. Business travelers checked emails for the last time. Families argued quietly over seats. Couples planned what they would do after landing. The loudspeaker announced boarding in a calm voice, and the aircraft waited patiently outside like a harmless machine doing its daily job. Among all those familiar airport scenes was a young woman sitting alone near the edge of the gate area, not scrolling her phone, not talking to anyone, just watching the runway in silence. She blended in so perfectly that no one had a reason to remember her face. When boarding began, the line moved slowly and casually. Jokes were made, bags were lifted, smiles were exchanged, and the quiet woman stood up, joined the line, and walked forward without saying a single word. At that moment, she was just another passenger, unnoticed, unimportant, and completely forgotten. The quiet woman's silence had already followed her long before the plane ever left the ground. She spoke to no one at the gate, answered no calls, and avoided every wandering glance, as if she had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being noticed. When her turn came to board, she handed over her ticket with a small nod and nothing else. No smile, no small talk, just a calm acceptance of routine. The gate agent scanned her pass and waved her through without a second thought, already focused on the next passenger, forgetting her the moment she stepped away. Inside the aircraft, a flight attendant offered the usual welcome, asking if she needed help. The woman responded with a quiet shake of her head and moved down the aisle, her footsteps soft, her presence barely registered. The crew had seen thousands like her before, or so they thought. She settled into her window seat, placed her worn jacket beside her, and stared out at the ground crew working below. A man in a sharp suit took the aisle seat nearby and considered making conversation, but her distant gaze ended the thought before it began. To him, she was simply another antisocial traveler, someone to ignore until landing. No one on that plane knew her name, her past, or the reason her eyes followed every movement outside the aircraft. They had no idea that her quiet was not emptiness, but experience waiting for the moment it would be needed most. As the aircraft climbed higher, the cabin settled into its familiar rhythm. Seatbelt signs flicked off, conversations softened, and the sound of engines became a steady background hum that made people feel safe without thinking about why. Flight attendants moved through the aisles offering drinks and polite smiles. Passengers leaned back, closed their eyes, or lost themselves in movies and spreadsheets. At 30,000 feet, life felt suspended, distant from the ground and far away from danger. The quiet woman by the window remained still, her eyes occasionally drifting from the clouds to the wing outside, watching the metal surface flex and adjust against the wind. While everyone else relaxed, she paid attention, not with fear, but with focus. Then small changes began to creep in, barely noticeable at first. The engine tone shifted, lights flickered once and returned. The plane adjusted its pitch a little too sharply. Most passengers dismissed it as turbulence, just another bump in the sky. But the quiet woman's posture changed, her shoulders stiffened, her gaze locked forward. She sensed what others could not. Something was wrong, and the calm that wrapped the cabin was beginning to crack. The moment came without warning. 1 second the engines roared like they always had, and the next, the sound vanished. Not a bang, not an explosion, just a sudden, terrifying silence that felt louder than any alarm. The plane lurched, trays rattled, and heads snapped up all at once. Overhead lights flickered, then dimmed, and a low mechanical warning echoed through the cabin, followed by gasps and rising screams as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. People grabbed for the masks with shaking hands. Parents pulled them over their children's faces, prayers spilled from trembling lips, and panic rolled through the rows like a wave. Yet the cockpit stayed quiet. No captain's voice, no calm explanation, only falling altitude and fear. Without power, the aircraft became a heavy piece of metal cutting through open air, every second dragging it closer to the ground. The crew scrambled in the cockpit, fighting dead screens and unresponsive controls, realizing too late that standard procedures were no longer enough. In the middle of the chaos, while cries filled the cabin, the quiet woman did not scream. She did not freeze. She reached up, secured her mask, and looked toward the front of the plane with clear eyes, because she understood exactly what had just happened and how little time they had left. Inside the cockpit, confusion turned into dread as the pilots tried everything they had been trained to do. Switches were flipped, backup systems checked, emergency checklists torn open and read aloud. But nothing responded the way it should. The screens stayed dark, and the controls felt lifeless in their hands. One of the flight attendants rushed forward, her voice shaking as she asked if there was anyone on board with flying experience. The question barely reached the cabin over the noise of panic, and at first, no one answered. Fear had locked everyone in their seats. Then, from halfway down the plane, a calm voice finally broke the chaos. It was soft, steady, and completely unexpected. The quiet woman stood up, her hands raised slightly, and said she could help. The nearest passengers stared at her in disbelief. Some even laughed nervously, thinking it was impossible. The crew hesitated. Her clothes were plain, her voice too gentle. Nothing about her looked like a hero, but with every second slipping away, doubt became a luxury they could no longer afford. They exchanged quick glances and nodded, stepping aside as she moved toward the cockpit. For the first time since boarding, every eye in the cabin followed the woman no one had noticed before, and in that moment, the fate of the flight shifted from hopelessness to a single fragile chance. The moment she entered the cockpit, the noise seemed to fade, replaced by urgency and focus. She moved with purpose, scanning the dark panels, feeling the resistance in the controls, listening to the wind tearing past the fuselage like a warning they could not ignore. She spoke quickly but clearly, giving instructions in simple words, asking for altitude, glide speed, and remaining manual control. The pilots followed without questioning now, fear replaced by instinct, trusting her calm more than their own panic. With no engines and limited systems, every movement mattered. She adjusted the trim by hand, calculated their descent with nothing but experience and instinct, and guided the nose just enough to keep the aircraft from dropping too fast, every correction buying them seconds, then minutes. The cabin felt the struggle. The plane shuddered, dipped, then steadied. Passengers screamed as the wings tilted, unaware that each motion was intentional, controlled, the difference between survival and free fall. Sweat ran down her face as she leaned forward, eyes locked ahead, jaw tight, knowing there was no room for mistakes. Below them lay only a narrow window of possibility, and she was pushing the aircraft toward it with everything she had. The ground finally came into view, rushing up faster than anyone expected, mountains and open land stretching beneath them. Too close, too fast, the margin for error almost gone. She spotted it in a heartbeat, a long, empty strip cutting through the landscape, barely wide enough, barely long enough, but it was the only chance they had left, and there would be no second attempt. Her voice sharpened as she called out final commands: speed, angle, timing, every word precise, every second critical. The pilots braced, hands shaking, trusting her completely now. The plane dropped hard, alarms screamed, the wings shook violently, and passengers cried out as the ground filled every window. Then the wheels slammed down, bounced once, twice, fighting to hold. For a breathless moment, it felt like the aircraft might tear itself apart. Then friction took over, the speed bled away, and the impossible happened. The plane stayed on the ground, sliding, slowing, finally coming to a shuddering stop. For several seconds, no one moved. The cabin sat in stunned silence, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and distant wind brushing against the aircraft's frame. People stared around them, unsure if it was truly over or just another pause before disaster. Then reality slowly returned. Sobs turned into laughter. Strangers hugged each other without thinking. Hands shook as oxygen masks were pulled away, and disbelief spread through the rows as passengers realized they were alive. Emergency crews rushed toward the aircraft, lights flashing, doors opening, fresh air flooding inside. Flight attendants moved quickly but gently, checking on everyone, their faces pale but filled with relief they could not hide. As people began to stand and look toward the front, their eyes searched for answers, and one by one, they understood the truth. The person who had saved them was not a decorated captain or a loud hero, but the quiet woman who had sat among them unnoticed. Whispers filled the cabin as heads turned in her direction. The same passengers who had ignored her hours earlier now stared with gratitude and awe, realizing how close they had come to never seeing another sunrise. As the passengers stepped off the plane, their legs weak and their hearts still racing, many of them looked back one last time, searching for the woman who had changed their fate. She stood quietly near the cockpit door, refusing attention, the same way she had refused conversation before the flight ever began. Some whispered thank you through tears. Others simply nodded, unable to find words big enough to carry what they felt. She answered them all with the same calm expression, as if saving a plane full of strangers was never something she expected praise for. Later, when the story spread, people would talk about luck, about miracles, about perfect timing, but the truth was simpler and far more powerful. They survived because someone everyone ignored was prepared when no one else was. That day became a reminder written into every memory on that flight. The quietest person in the room may carry the strongest answers, and the person you overlook today could be the one who saves you tomorrow. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because sometimes the most important voices are the ones we almost never hear.